Hello guys, UnoPro here, back with a different video today. Just probably by the time this video comes out, the new patch will have brought in the Bloodborn spells changes. So this is before the patch, right before it's going to come out. There will be some nerfs, but I want to get this out of the way because I'm really excited to talk about these new Bloodborn spells. So for those who aren't familiar with them, I'll just go over them quickly. So basically they're 1 mana. They start at 4 mana, or 4 cores, which will be turn 3, and then they reactivate every second turn. But I also do believe that if you don't use it on one of those turns, you can use it the turn after, but if you don't use it that turn as well, when it refreshes, you'll still only have one of them. But it does function as a spell card that goes into a separate slot in your hand. So it does work as spell abilities, and it is like a card in your hand, but doesn't actually count for your hand count and that kind of thing, I believe. So anyway, we're just going to go over it. Just in general, what it appears like is that each faction has kind of got an ability that sways one way to aggro or control. So there's kind of, each class has one that maybe is a bit more controlling, one's a bit more aggro. Some can be kind of combined, some aren't so clear. But we'll go over that and we'll talk about what kind of decks might arise. We won't talk too much about the strength of the decks in general, because we don't know how the meta is going to change. Cards change, new cards come in, we don't know how the decks will line up. What we can talk about is what kind of archetypes it can support, and also I think a big thing is how the hero abilities, I might just call that a lot of the time, not just Bloodborne spells, a bit clunky, how they line up with each other, because one of the reasons this change was made was that the developers wanted to, kind of stop those top deck wars. While it doesn't completely stop them, it gives you something to do, and there's more skill in the deck building process. What hero power you've chosen has affected how the late game will go. So for instance, Riva versus Cassiva, Cassiva just completely counters the hero power, and some line up better than others. Some are better early game, some are better late game, but we'll go over them. So first, I just want to break it down into kind of categories of what they can provide. So some can provide, board presence. Some are, just damaging, threatening, and they kind of go into a couple of different categories. So there's like value. There's ones that get the most out of your minions and of your cards. There's some that provide inevitability. Now, what I mean by inevitability is that basically, if you can keep things equal, your hero power will win you the game. And there's a couple that are like that. And I think that opens up a lot of potential. While we don't have a big card pool, there is still potential for really controlling decks that can cut slots out of their deck that they would normally need for a lot of win conditions, to just relying on that hero power and maybe 1 or 2 big threats as the win condition, and allows you to have more removal, more tools to survive the early game. I'm not sure if the card pool is at that point for most classes, but there's still some potential there. So I think that's enough of talking about in general. We might as well get into it. I don't want to make the video too long. And I'm sure you guys have seen this before. Okay, so first off, Starhorn the Seeker. Now, I'm just going to go left to right and go down. So Starhorn the Seeker, he's the alternate general for the Magmar faction. His ability is both players draw a card. Now, this one is a bit weird. It's the first and only ability that is a beneficial effect for your opponent as well. All the other ones are basically strictly better for yourself. Now, this might seem a bit weaker, but I think this one will be very underrated. It basically lets you play very similar to how old Duelist was, with 2 cards a turn. But I think there's a lot of confusion about this. Some people are saying this will be a control card, because Magmar struggles with duel, but I really don't believe that to be the case. I think this is 100% an aggro card. We already have, a fairly viable aggro Magmar deck going around with Dietard Frenzy, the 0 and 1 mana spells. This plus even more draw with Spelljammer, it lets you basically spew out all these really cheap spells, and that's a big threat. You're basically playing old Duelist where, without Emerald Rejuvenator in the meta. So that's definitely something. I'm not sure if it'll be enough. Aggro Mag wasn't that good when everyone's drawing 2 cards, and this will be quite similar. But if Aggro Mag is going to be a deck, then I think this will be the general for it, because the other Magmar power is just a bit too slow. Alright, Sinus Charge. I'm probably going to butcher most of these names, guys. I don't really know how to say them. Sinus Sarge, we'll call it that. Your general deals double damage to minions for 1 turn. Now, this is interesting, And I think what's really important to evaluate when we consider these Bloodborne spells is that they're not going to be available the first 2 turns of the game. So when you're dealing with those 2/3s, occasionally 4 health minions, this would be really good early game. 1 mana, you kill it, just with a general hit. Unfortunately, it basically comes out, as your opponent starts to drop stuff like Dancing Blades, the bigger threats, the Archons, which makes it awkward, just as a simple control tool to deal with these big minions, because taking a lot of damage still, you're not necessarily one-shotting it. Where the strength of this card, and I think most people are realizing this, is this general is designed pretty much for Artifact Revet. It synchronizes really, really well with artifacts like Hexblade, that's dealing 10 damage to any minion. You're killing Iron Cliffs, Archons, and you're taking 1 damage. Even Safa Yakia becomes 8 damage, which is pretty huge. And then also Wildfire Unk is something people have picked up on as well. Blast, you can kill any 4 health minion from across the map. Basically the artifact package. I don't think this will be enough to push Artifact Vet into tier 1 at the moment. It might be, I could easily be wrong. It's a very powerful effect situationally, but it's less consistent. And I think I'm trying to be a little bit maybe too hesitant of powers that aren't good by themselves, because if you're playing a late game deck and you get to the top decking kind of wars or late stage of the game, your opponent's playing big threats, this hero power isn't going to be useful every turn. And there's definitely turns it won't be useful at all. Whereas for most of these, they're nearly all useful every turn. Which is definitely important to keep in mind, because once you get to 9 mana, you're playing this every turn. It's 1 mana, so you want to play it pretty much every single turn. And if it turns you're not, and your opponent's doing something proactive with their hero power, I think that can be a little bit scary. Anyway, Vuth the Immortal. Now this one is definitely, I think this is the most hard to judge one of all of them. So it's Overload, your general gains 1 attack. Now this is a permanent attack buff to your general, which is really huge because we have counter-attacking in the game. So as soon as your general, does this ability once, all your opponent's 2/3s kind of just die in 1 hit. They don't really do much whatsoever. But it's also, remember, this comes out when you have 4 mana, so 2/3s are less relevant there. I think this is definitely on the stronger side, and I think it has potential to allow for like a control Magma deck that doesn't really run a lot of late game threats and simply relies on the hero power just eventually getting out of control. It's obviously not as consistent, and it won't always affect the board. But by the time you get to 8, let's see, if you're at 9 mana, you'll have used it 3 times already. It's 5 attack general permanently. It's only going to get big from there. It can be Dispel. I think if you can stay in parity, despite your hero power not always doing a lot, then this simply will probably be the best late game, because it's a constant threat. They're never going to tell you with the general. If you get to something like 6 health, you're one-shotting most things that aren't Archons coming into your face. It makes it very easy, and you've got to have to remember that Magma has the best 1-card heal in the game with Earthsphere. So it can definitely go for a more general-centered approach, where we see these cards that have been in Magma that are general-centered, like the Frenzy one, that kind of thing. There's definitely potential there. I definitely don't think this is an aggro card. I think it's possibly too slow. Maybe if you go a little bit more mid-rangey, then it can work, because it's a late-game threat all by itself. It lets you go a little bit later, but I think if you're a real aggro deck, then you want the Star 1 power instead. Anyway, let's go on to Xerix Starstrider. Starstrider? Yeah, that sounds about right. So he has Summon a 2/2 Rush Dervish in a random nearby space. Now, the fact that it's random I don't like. I don't like an ability that's going to happen every turn in the late game to be random. I think that's randomness all the time, which is, it's fine to have a little bit of randomness, but dealing with it, once or twice every game is a problem for me sometimes, and then dealing with it, 10 times a game is a bit annoying. But I think it needs to be, because this ability is very, very strong, and it basically has, the versatility of a lot of these other ones. It can actually kind of do a similar role to a lot of these other powers. So, for instance, the Sinus one dealing double damage. Just with a normal general hit, this will basically do the same thing because you run the Dervish into it. So there's a lot of similarities, and it's very, very versatile. Can work as just simply 2 damage per turn late game. Can be used as Dune Caster. I think this is definitely one of the stronger ones, just because of how consistent it is. 2 damage to, obviously not to everything, but with Rush, Dervishes have a pretty big range, plus you can move your general. I think there's a random nearby space, so obviously there's more randomness because it can come next to a minion, but if it's just the general run, there's a lot of consistency there. You can pretty much get in a decent zone, because Rush is such a powerful mechanic in this game. I think this will be one of the better ones, and I think if you're not running Artifact Vet, this will be the Vet general you run. Okay, so Lilith Blight Chaser. Shadow Spawn, summon 2 Wraithlings nearby your general. Okay, so obviously with the Abyssian generals, there's quite clear archetypes which way you kind of want to go. This obviously enables Swarm and Deathwatch decks really, really well. You're basically always going to have a target for stuff like Darkfire Sacrifice, which only becomes a 1 mana ramp, but you still get a 1/1 out of it. All your Deathwatch minions. I think this is really good. Swarm was already a pretty decent deck, and I think it probably will be tier 1. It'll be closer to tier 1, without a doubt. That's a really powerful ability, and we got Wraithling Swarm, 3 mana for 3 1/1s. I guess 1.5 mana is around what this is probably worth. It's probably still only a 1 mana ability, but it's getting closer, because obviously the more bodies you want, the more power within the single card, which is also a factor. This isn't using a card, so I think it's very well costed, and it's not that much worse than Gloom Chaser on a permanent ability. Anyway, on to the next one. We'll go across to Kalios. Okay, so this one is really, really interesting. The Songhai ones are really, I'm not too sure about them. Okay, so Blink, teleport a friendly minion up to 2 spaces. Now, like I was saying with Sinus, is that this is one of those abilities that's not always useful. There's times you won't have a friendly minion, there's times you won't need to teleport a friendly minion, and it doesn't really do anything proactive by itself. So because of that, it makes me think this is the more aggressive power, despite the fact that the other one, summons Heartseekers. This one seems a little bit more aggressive to me, just because it doesn't have any inevitability, doesn't generate value on its own. Now, what this is obviously good with is backstab minions, range minions, basically any of those minions that want to generate value by not being in combat or getting to certain spots. It definitely keeps them alive, makes every backstab minion a big threat by itself. And I think this has a lot of potential, this one. Maybe these decks can go a little bit more late game if they can use these range and backstab minions to clear other minions, generate value that way. Then we can maybe see some kind of late game deck. But I'm not sure that it will. The problem has always been your opponent clearing the minions rather than them not being able to get to where they need to. I think a lot of the time, especially when we used to run 3 Mist Dragon, 2 Juxtaposition with a 2-card draw, we still had problems where our opponent would just clear our backstab minions or clear our range minions rather than us not having the tools to teleport them into the right spots. Okay, so go over to Kara Winterblade. This is another a weird one, also one that's not always good. Give all minions in your hand +1/+1. Now, this is it's a bit of a weird one. It's similar to the Lion spell that gives +1/+1 to all friendly minions for 2 mana, but obviously this doesn't affect the board immediately. I'm not sure on this one. I saw a lot of people rating it pretty good. The fact that it stacks is pretty huge. You can have a couple Saber-Spine Tigers in your hand, stack them up, they're coming out as, well, I think Saber-Spine getting targets getting nerfed, but just coming out as like a 5/4 is pretty good with Rush for 3 mana. And that's only 2 charge of this. I think the problem is that late game, you're not always going to have a lot of minions in your hand. I think you'd rather it affect the board, probably. That probably is too strong. It could be good. You're definitely going to need a more draw heavy kind of deck. Maybe you want stuff like Snow Chasers. Really just a lot of card draw as well. I'm not sure. This one definitely is probably the more controlling of the Vaynire powers. But then again, I think you can go for like a control deck, but instead of having these big threats, you can have a lot more small minions, a lot more card draw, and simply rely on your hero power to build up those late game threats. Okay, so we'll go over to RG and high main. Basically, I'm not pushing to go on Fade Blood. Yeah, I'll go RG. Okay. So, Raw. 2 attack to a nearby friendly minion. This one originally seemed really strong to me, and I think people are kind of underestimating this one now. I think it probably will be one of the most strong ones, even though it doesn't generate value by its own. Something I have said. It gives you a lot of consistency. It's very consistent power. It's always going to be a positive thing once you hit a minion, and it just makes everything a big threat. This one could be very... I think it's definitely suited for a more aggressive liner. I think just compared to the other liner power, it will be a lot better. They both kind of rely on having a minion that has survived to attack. This one has the ability of, you know, working on full health minions, generates value multiple turns ahead, and it also works with rush minions. So it's definitely the more aggressive of the liner powers. And I think in your standard liner, it's not a heal liner. You'll want this every time, and I think it's decent. I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's pretty solid. Going to give value to all your minions and just let you trade up for days with, you know, your early game minions as well. Okay. So yeah, that one's pretty simple. We're not going to talk about that one too much, but I think basically when it comes to the liner, if you're not playing heal liner, you're playing Argion. Hi man. Anyway, Cassavia, Soul Reaper. Now this one is a really fun hero power. I think a lot of people will play it, even if it's not that good. But it looks decent. Okay, so deal 1 damage to a minion if it dies this turn. Turn that space into Shadow Creep. Now I think people's first kind of reaction to this was that it's just going to be for, you know, decks built around Shadow Creep, which I'm not sure is true. Just because of how flexible the 1 mana cost on these Bloodborne spells is, you can kind of fit it in nearly every turn you kill a minion. And by the time you get to like 7 mana, you can already have had like 2 hero powers in, maybe 3, so that makes your first Shadow Never deal 6 damage at least. And I don't think it's that hard, you know, to fit that in. So I think that will be pretty strong, and I'm not sure you need the other Shadow Creep tools. There's not a lot at the moment, obviously, and that's definitely something that's lacking. But just simply Shadow Nova, just as something to actually affect units with Shadow Creep, without them being able to react to it, is basically all you need. There's possibly potential for this to be run in a deck without Shadow Nova. That's not Swarm, where you just want the 1 damage ping. I think if, you know, aggro decks are prevalent, or lots of AoE in the meta, where you don't want those 2/1/1 Wraithlings, especially if Reaver Eventide is in the meta, then I think this power will be played heaps. Because it just generates, it's just a 1 damage ping to a minion, and I think that's pretty fine for, you know, 1 mana, similar to a Blood Tier Alchemist, where you get a Shadow Creep space instead of a 2/1. Arguably it'll be a little bit worse, but still useful. So I think that's pretty strong. I think we'll see that a lot. People will definitely experiment with that one, just heaps and heaps. But definitely not confined to just an all Shadow Creep deck. I do expect that eventually the meta will settle on just like a Cassavia, slightly more controlling list with Shadow Novas, for that general in particular. Okay, so onto Reaver Eventide. Summon a Heartseeker nearby your general. Now this one stood out to me at first. You know, 1 mana, 1 Heartseeker. That's already a minion. Nearby your general. I think people are underestimating his power a little bit. Nearby your general is not that bad if you're equal on board, because you can simply run away, put it behind you. If you're free to run, then this doesn't really matter. You can move away the Heartseeker next turn. The fact that Primus Shieldmaster is in the meta now probably hurts his power a little bit, because, you know, it's always going to be able to affect the Heartseeker pretty easily. But I think it's still pretty strong because it generates the most long-term value, as well as, you know, Vaths. So if we compare it, if we consider a situation where, you know, people have no cards, this beats or draws with every other hero power. And it just, an army of Heartseekers is really, if you can stop your opponent basically from killing it with minions and generals, this hero power is super strong, even though it's a bit slow. Just because those 1/1s are going to stack up, and if they're using resources to kill those 1/1s, that's obviously really good because you're not using any resources to create those 1/1s. So I think there's a lot of potential for this hero power, and it could also fit into a aggro Songhai, where you're running stuff like 3 Killing Edge, and maybe even Death Strike Steel is good with this card, just because a Heartseeker is going to stick eventually. But it also opens up the door for more controlling Songhais, and even though it's quite slow, just an army of 1/1 Heartseekers Heartseeker every turn. If your opponent's not just killing for free with their general, then they're going to use resources on those 1/1s, and eventually they're going to run out while you can just keep clearing their board, and playing your removal, which Songhai can do with Bear Seal. We've seen Spell High variants that can be very controlling. Even though Songhai doesn't seem like a control class, I think there's definitely potential there. And I think just kind of riding that hero power to eventual value, there's something there. I think I saw some people saying this is the worst one. I definitely don't think it's the worst one. I think there's potential here, because how often do you just want to ignore like a 1/1 Jaxi, mini Jax, or 1/1 Heartseeker when you're in game? You very rarely want to let it live, especially in Songhai where we have Killing Edge, Death Strike Seal, definitely lots of stuff that can benefit from it. Anyway, I think that's enough on that one. So yeah, basically I think controlling Reaver is definitely more controlling. Songhai is definitely more aggro, just because one generates value by itself and the other needs early game minions for them. Okay, so Fey Bloodwing Warbird, deal 2 damage to enemy in the enemy general's column. Now, this is another one I think people have underrated a little bit, because I don't think they really understand this card as much. I think it's most comparable to basically the Hunter hero power in Hearthstone. 2 damage to the enemy general's face every turn. That's a decent sized clock, and you're not really spending a lot of mana to do it. By turn 9, say you got 3 hero powers off, it's already 6 damage for 3 mana to the face, and then every other turn they have to deal 2 damage. So unless your opponent's way ahead, if you've seen the meta slow down, this is definitely a clock. And even though it's a bit slower, because to really use you need to get to 9 mana for it to really start pressuring your opponent, the fact that it will force your opponents to play their minions awkwardly can buy you some time, because sometimes they want to stick it in your face, but then suddenly they're going to be weak to Warbird, and then you've just maybe saved 4 damage from a Dancing Blades because you can now run away. I think it definitely can open up some different types of Vayner. Maybe we will see some kind of stall Vaynars that will just chip away you a little bit and then hit you down with Warbird every turn while stalling with stuff like Gravity Wells even. I'm not quite sure, maybe there's something like that. But also just an aggro Vayner can definitely benefit from this hero power that puts your opponent on a clock and really forces them to beat you. It definitely opens up a lot of options for Vayner. It's definitely a hero power I think people have definitely underrated quite a lot. Okay, so that's basically for that one. Oh, plus I also want to mention there is where the Mesmerize will be changed to 1 mana, move an enemy minion or general. I think it's a space. 1 space? 2 space? I'm not sure exactly how it works, but it will move it, so it will set up for Warbird. And just the threat of that, all these things, even though the positioning is easy to play around by itself, you have to do that every turn, and it can always help you in some way or other, even if you won't always realize how much it's helping you. Anyway, I'm just going to quickly get rid of my webcam so we can see this last power. Ziran Sunforge. Restore 3 health to a friendly minion. Now, I think in a vacuum, this is a lot worse than Argion's power, just because both rely on having a minion alive, 2 attack, 3 health, similar effects, but one's a lot less conditional than the other. But what we do have to keep in mind is that Heal Liner is a real thing, and there are a lot of cards that synergize with healing effects. Like Sunrise are always going to be able to get those procs off, and they're healing 3 too. Though the problem, like it has been before, is that you need to have a damage minion for these heals to go off. And because it doesn't heal your general, you're not going to get those healing effects very reliably. Basically, I think this might actually be the weakest hero power, just because we already have Lionel already has the tools to punish when a big minion can live. We have stuff like Divine Bond, Holy Immolation, all these kind of things. And then you can also play stuff like Arclight Regalia when you're ahead on board. All these things that already punish it. And I think this is slightly too win more. It doesn't really generate value. It doesn't deal with your opponent's threats. If Heal Lionel can prove strong enough, maybe this general can see some play. But I think it's more a problem of having targets to be healed than having the backup for when you can heal cards, if that makes sense. So I do think that Argion will definitely be the choice for 90% of Lionel decks. Maybe Heal Lionel will see play, but I just don't know if there's enough consistency in being able to heal a minion and take advantage of the effects every single turn. And I think that normal Lionel will be able to punish having something like an Ironcliff live by Divine Bonding it instead of healing for 3 damage. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I know this is all speculation. Just kind of my thoughts. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them yourself. I'm definitely looking forward to experimenting with nearly all of these. Probably not Zeron, Sunforge. I'm really not sure on her power. 3 health, restored, has to be a damage minion. I'd rather just give any minion to attack, do something proactive. Anyway guys, just want to say I'm really excited for this game now. This is going to open up so much more variety. If we say that somehow in a dreamland where each general has a viable deck, that's at least 12 viable decks, which is definitely going to shake up the meta. And I think there's so much potential here. It's going to take a while before everyone figures it out. And there's definitely going to be a lot more tools, and maybe even some real control decks, real combo decks. We'll see. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much, and if you want to see more, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.